12,000 against 200,000, an impossible imbalance that should never have ended in victory. Under the burning Greek sun, exhausted Spartan warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival. Across the plain, Xerxes' colossal army waited, banners snapping in the wind, drums echoing like thunder. This was supposed to be Persia's final act of domination. The smoke of Thermopylae had not yet faded from memory. Leonidas was dead. His body lay somewhere beneath Persian boots, his name already turning into legend. Athens had burned, her temples reduced to ash, her people scattered like ghosts across the sea. To the east, the greatest empire the world had ever known believed the war was over. Xerxes believed Greece had broken. But Greece was not silent. Across fractured city-states, often enemies, rarely united messengers moved with urgency. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Megara, Plataea. Old rivalries were swallowed by something heavier than pride: extinction. This was no longer a war for borders or tribute. It was a war for existence itself. If Plataea fell, Greece would kneel forever. Xerxes marched with certainty. His army stretched beyond the horizon, men from every corner of the empire, banners of gold and crimson snapping in the wind. To him, resistance was mathematical madness. Numbers always won. Empires were built on that truth, or so he believed. The Greeks saw something else. They saw home soil beneath their sandals. They saw hills that narrowed movement, rivers that punished cavalry, ground that rewarded discipline. Most of all, they carried memory of burning cities, of butchered kin, of a king who chose death over surrender. Spartan hoplites tightened their grips on scarred shields, not because they expected to survive, but because retreat was no longer an option. At Plataea, two visions of power approached the same plane. One side fought to expand an empire already bloated with conquest. The other fought because there was nowhere left to run. The air grew tense as armies assembled. Drums echoed in the distance. Armor creaked. Prayers were whispered to gods who had already taken so much. This battlefield would not decide a campaign, it would decide whether Greece would ever rise again. And neither side yet understood what this land was about to demand in blood, fear, and resolve. The plain of Plataea waited, ready to choose which army truly belonged to history. Fear settled over the camps long before the first spear was raised. In the Persian ranks, the sheer size of the army was meant to inspire confidence, but instead it suffocated. Endless lines of men slept shoulder to shoulder, strangers bound together only by obedience. Orders traveled slowly, distorted as they passed through languages, ranks, and egos. Many soldiers had marched for months across foreign lands they did not understand, fighting wars they did not believe in. They were told victory was inevitable, but inevitability feels hollow when death stands this close. Among the Greeks, fear was sharper, more personal. They could see the Persian numbers with their own eyes, a sea of bodies, a horizon of banners. Every man knew the odds, counted them in silence, felt them press against his chest in the dark. Spartan discipline kept voices low, faces rigid, but beneath bronze helmets, thoughts churned. How many blows could a shield take? How long before arms failed? How long before courage cracked? Commanders felt the weight most of all. Pausanias of Sparta wrestled with responsibility that could erase an entire civilization in a single day. One mistake, one poorly timed order, and Greece would vanish into history as a warning, not a legacy. Night after night, he studied the land, listened to scouts, measured Persian movements, searching for certainty where none existed. The Persians mistook Greek stillness for fear. They harassed the lines with cavalry, cut supply routes, poisoned water sources. Each act was meant to break morale. Instead, it hardened it. Hunger sharpened focus. Exhaustion stripped away illusion. The Greeks stopped waiting for rescue and accepted a single truth. They would either hold here or never hold again. As days passed, tension became unbearable. Men slept in armor. Hands trembled not from weakness, but restraint. Everyone sensed it the moment was coming. And when it did, one army would discover that fear, when disciplined, becomes something far more dangerous than confidence. In the silence before battle, the smallest mistake was already preparing to destroy the largest army on earth. Plataea was not just a meeting place of armies, it was a test of understanding. The land itself seemed quiet, almost indifferent. Yet every slope and stream carried consequence. Low hills folded into narrow approaches. Dry riverbeds cut through the plain like scars, harmless at a glance but treacherous under pressure. To the untrained eye, it was open ground. To Greek commanders, it was a weapon waiting to be used. The Persians never truly saw it. Their strength lay in numbers, speed, and cavalry dominance, advantages that demanded space. But Plataea denied them that freedom. Horses struggled on uneven ground. Supply wagons slowed. Massive formations found themselves compressed, tangled, impatient. What should have been an overwhelming display of power became an awkward sprawl. The Greeks prepared differently. Hoplites drilled relentlessly, shields locking into a single breathing wall of bronze and muscle. Spears were checked, grips tightened, formations rehearsed until movement became instinct. Each man knew his place, not just in the line but in history. Spartan armor was heavier, movement slower, but every step forward was deliberate, controlled, final. Persian commanders grew restless. Days passed with no decisive engagement. Supplies dwindled. Cavalry harassment failed to provoke collapse. Greek lines bent, shifted, withdrew slightly but never broke. To Persian eyes, it looked like weakness. To Greek commanders, it was patience sharpened into strategy. Small mistakes began stacking quietly. Orders contradicted one another. Units repositioned without coordination. Scouts underestimated Greek resolve and misread intentional withdrawals as panic. Xerxes' generals believed time favored them, but time was doing the opposite. It was eroding discipline, confidence, and cohesion. Meanwhile, the Greeks studied everything: how Persian units moved, how quickly orders traveled, where formations hesitated, where terrain slowed momentum. Plataea whispered its secrets to those willing to listen, and only one side was listening closely. As the sun dipped and shadows stretched across the plain, both armies felt it. The tension had shifted. What had been a waiting game was now a countdown. One decision remained, and when it came, the land, the formation, and the discipline of a smaller force would collide with the impatience of an empire too large to control itself. The battlefield was set not for a clash of numbers, but for a collapse born of arrogance. The moment did not arrive with thunder or ceremony. It came quietly through confusion. In the Persian camp, impatience had fermented into recklessness. Supply lines were strained, morale thinning with every passing day. The Greeks refused to break. Xerxes' commanders debated, argued, second-guessed one another. Victory felt close, yet stubbornly unreachable. Then reports began to spread through the ranks. The Greeks were withdrawing. Their lines were shifting back toward higher ground. Fires were moved. Gaps appeared where shields once stood. To Persian eyes, this was collapse. What the Greeks were executing was a controlled repositioning, measured, deliberate, necessary. What the Persians believed they were witnessing was fear finally winning. And belief is more powerful than truth. Without unified command, Persian units surged forward. Orders were issued too quickly, then contradicted. Infantry advanced ahead of cavalry. Elites pressed without support. What should have been a coordinated assault became a forward spill of bodies driven by urgency rather than plan. Discipline fractured as momentum took control. Across the field, Greek commanders saw it instantly. The trap had sprung not because it was forced, but because it was invited. Spartan officers shouted orders with brutal clarity, shields locked, lines reformed on ground they had already chosen. Men who moments before appeared to be retreating now stood immovable. Feet dug into earth. They understood far better than their enemy ever could. The Persians kept coming. Compressed by terrain, stripped of maneuverability, their advantage dissolved with every step forward. Units collided with one another. Signals failed. Dust and noise swallowed commands. The mass of the army became its own enemy, and then the distance vanished. What Xerxes had intended as a crushing advance became something far worse, a blind charge into a formation built specifically to absorb and destroy momentum. The Greeks did not rush. They did not shout. They waited. Because discipline is deadliest when it does not hurry. In a single misjudgment, Persia surrendered control and handed the battlefield to men who had been waiting for exactly this moment. The collision came not as chaos, but as inevitability. The Greek line moved first, slowly, relentlessly. Bronze shields locked together with a sound like grinding stone, their overlapping rims forming a living wall. Spears angled forward in perfect alignment, not swung wildly, not wasted. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. This was not an army charging, it was an army advancing with certainty. The Persians met them in fragments. Compressed by terrain and their own numbers, their front ranks slammed into the phalanx without space to maneuver. Light armor bent against heavy bronze. Short spears failed to reach past shield rims. The momentum they relied upon evaporated the instant it touched Greek discipline. Dust rose in choking clouds. The ground shook beneath thousands of feet. Shouts in a dozen languages collided into meaningless noise. Persian officers screamed for formation, for spacing, for control, but the mass behind them kept pushing forward, blind and unstoppable. What should have been reinforcement became pressure from the rear, crushing their own men against Greek shields. The Spartans did not shout in reply. They pushed. Every shove was synchronized, every pause intentional. The phalanx absorbed impact like a living fortress, then responded with ruthless efficiency. When a Persian line buckled, the Greeks stepped forward, never breaking formation, never chasing. Victory was not found in speed, it was found in cohesion. Persian elites surged to restore order. They wore finer armor, carried better weapons, fought with courage, but courage alone could not solve geometry. They could not flank, they could not break through. Every attempt collapsed into the same brutal reality. A wall that did not move, did not panic, did not tire. Fear spread faster than commands. Men began to hesitate. Hesitation became retreat. Retreat turned into collision with those still advancing from behind. The Persian front wavered not because they lacked numbers, but because they lacked space, unity, and time. Across the field, Greek commanders sensed it. This was not victory yet, but it was momentum. And momentum, once captured by disciplined hands, becomes unstoppable. As the Persian center strained under its own weight, one truth became unavoidable. The empire had brought too many men to a place that demanded control, not excess. And the phalanx kept moving forward. What had begun as an advance was becoming a collapse, and the Persians were running out of room to escape it. Then the Persian line broke, not all at once, but in fractures that spread like cracks through stone. A unit faltered, pushed too hard from behind and too fiercely from the front. Another tried to turn, only to find itself trapped by its own numbers. Commands dissolved into noise. Standards vanished in the dust. What had once been an army became a crowd. The Greeks felt it through their shields. Pressure lessened. Resistance softened. The Spartan-led phalanx surged forward, not faster, but heavier. Each step now carried inevitability. Spears found gaps. Shields drove men backward into panic and compression. The Persians had nowhere to go. Too many bodies, too little space. Fear ricocheted through the ranks, faster than any order ever could. Persian commanders attempted to rally the center. They shouted, gestured, tried to restore formation, but authority means nothing when soldiers can no longer move. Cavalry units were useless. hemmed in by terrain and chaos. The elite immortals fought desperately, but even they were swallowed by disorder. Courage turned into isolation. Isolation into collapse. The Greeks pressed on with grim focus. There was no celebration in their advance, no wild charge, only breath, step, strike, repeat. Discipline had stripped emotion from movement, leaving behind something colder and more dangerous. This was not fury, it was execution of purpose. Soon, retreat became route. Men turned, collided, fell. The rear ranks realized too late what the front had already learned. Numbers were now a trap. The Persian army folded inward on itself, momentum reversing violently. What had begun as an invasion ended as a desperate attempt to escape the very ground they had chosen. Across the plain, silence began to replace command. The noise of an empire dying does not come from screams alone, it comes from the sudden absence of control. By the time Persian forces fled toward their camp, the battle was already decided. Not by chance, not by gods, but by preparation, meeting arrogance at exactly the wrong moment. As dust settled over Plataea, one truth stood unmistakable in the Greek lines. The impossible had happened, and the greatest army on earth was running. What remained was not a question of victory, but of how completely an empire could shatter in a single day. When the noise finally faded, the plain of Plataea felt unnaturally still. Where moments before the weight of an empire had pressed forward, there was now only confusion, abandonment, and disbelief. Persian banners lay discarded, trampled into the dust they once claimed as conquered ground. Camps stood half empty, supplies untouched, not because they were plentiful, but because there was no army left organized enough to claim them. The Greeks did not cheer. They stood in silence, shields resting against tired legs, breath heavy in their chests. Victory had come, but it carried no joy, only relief sharpened by exhaustion. Too many faces were missing from the line, too many names would never answer again. Freedom, it seemed, always demanded a price paid in silence. For Persia, the loss was catastrophic. Thousands were gone, but more devastating than numbers was the collapse of myth. The idea of Persian invincibility, carefully built through decades of conquest, had shattered on Greek soil. Xerxes' invasion, meant to erase resistance forever, instead ensured that Greece would never forget its own strength. Messengers would carry the news across the Aegean. The empire could bleed. The empire could fail. The empire could be stopped. For the Greeks, Plataea became a turning point. No single city claimed the victory. No king demanded a crown. What endured instead was memory of discipline holding against fear, of unity forged under impossible odds. Stories spread, growing in the telling, shaping how future generations would understand courage and sacrifice. Yet even as songs were composed and offerings made to the gods, one truth lingered beneath the triumph. Greece had survived, but it had also awakened. And awakened powers, like empires, are never truly at rest again. The battle was over, but its consequences were only beginning to move through history. Plataea did not end the wars of Greece. It ended something far larger. On that quiet plain, beneath skies that had watched empires rise without question, a simple truth was carved into history. Power is not measured by how many follow orders, but by how many understand why they stand. Persia had brought the weight of the world with it, yet failed to grasp the land, the enemy, and the cost of arrogance. The Greeks understood all three. They fought not as subjects, but as men bound to their soil, their families, and their memory. Discipline replaced desperation. Unity replaced fear. Where Persia relied on scale, Greece relied on purpose, and purpose does not collapse when pressure increases. It sharpens. Plataea became a lesson passed forward through generations. That numbers without control become weakness. That confidence without restraint becomes blindness. That empires fall not when they are challenged, but when they believe they cannot be. The Spartans returned home without conquest, without gold, without monuments carved in their honor. What they carried instead was proof that free men, standing their ground together, could stop even the largest force ever assembled. History would remember Xerxes as a king who tried to command the world, but it would remember Plataea as the moment the world answered back. Because sometimes history is not changed by those who march the farthest, but by those who refuse to take a single step back. And on the fields of Plataea, the age of unstoppable empires quietly came to an end.